Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Clara Blood, and today I'm going to be reviewing some gouged and shaped cane that Barton Cane was nice enough to send to me. I'm going to first tell you the parameters that I am evaluating the cane on. So the first thing I'm looking at is the quality of the cane. Now I'm looking for cane that is golden and shiny as opposed to cane that is kind of pale and very grainy. Golden and shiny cane will tend to lead to reeds that last longer, project better, and sound better. If it's too soft, too pale, too grainy, you're going to get a reed that may not respond super well and won't really last very long. The next thing I'm looking at is the crease of the shaped piece of cane. We want it to be a nice thin line and not kind of splayed open at the fold. If it's splayed open at the fold, you're much more likely to have loose sides, and if your reed has loose sides, it's probably going to be a little unstable. The next thing I look at is the function of the reed itself. The first thing you want to have your reed do is to make a sound. So the first thing I'm evaluating here is response. After that, I'm going to be reviewing intonation. Response and intonation are the two most important functions of the reed. And chances are, if your reed responds well and is well in tune, it will meet the needs of your third parameter, which is your sound quality. So just to give a point of reference, I am making this video at the end of August. I'm just outside of Chicago, Illinois. It's quite hot here. It's about 93 degrees and quite humid, just so you know the context in which I'm making the reeds, because we all know that the result of your reeds very much depends on the climate that you are working in. Okay, so now that you know how I'm going to be judging this cane, let's dive in and see how this cane performs. Okay, so now I'm going to evaluate the outside of the cane. Now looking at this piece of cane, you'll notice in the picture that the light is reflecting off of the cane. That's good. That kind of shininess tells me that there's a decent amount of hardness in this piece of cane. As for color, it's kind of a pale yellowish color, which for me, I like to see that because it means that's in the kind of medium hardness range. Again, I won't really fully be able to tell until I actually start scraping the piece of cane. However, this gives me an idea that this is sort of a medium hard piece of cane, which is what I'm looking for. It's not too soft, it's not too hard. Generally, we do want cane that is harder, but if it's too hard, then it may be almost brittle and have a tendency to crack, which of course we don't want. You'll also notice in the picture that there is some brown spots on the cane, which generally means that it's going to be a pretty good piece of cane, anecdotally. It kind of indicates that it's a fairly robust piece of cane, in my experience. Now, we're going to take a look at the inside of the piece of shaped cane. What does this tell us? Well, this basically tells us the quality of the gouger blade that the piece of cane was gouged on. This also does tell us a little bit about the relative hardness of the cane, because if the piece of cane is too soft, it will tend to kind of have a very grainy, almost sort of shredded wheat kind of quality to it. It won't have these nice, long, consistent lines. We want it to be smooth, and we want to see like continuous, some continuous grains, but we generally want it to look really nice and smooth. A nice smooth scrape on the inside of the piece of cane tells you that the gouger blade is sharp and that you're generally going to be having a pretty good piece of cane that will vibrate well. The next thing we're going to look at is the fold on the piece of gouged cane. I've soaked this piece of cane in slightly warm water for about 15 minutes or so. So you can tell here in the picture that it passes that fold test. It's a nice thin line. It hasn't splayed open at the top. Again, this is a really good sign. So far, this cane is passing all of the tests. So I'm very, very happy to see that. I'm about to try the reed on the oboe for the first time. I'm going to give it a crow. Now, that means that there's some nice response. There's some good lows in the crow. Again, this is definitely not a finished reed. Trying on the oboe for the first time, but this is going to give me a sense of the response and a little bit of sense of the evenness of the scale. Yeah, so again, this is still a fair amount of cane on the reed, but for just the first time trying on the oboe, there's some pretty good response on a tip that's still pretty thick. So the response, it will definitely get easier as I scrape it, but first impressions are that there's a lot of potential in this reed. There's some nice lows in the sound, and generally a pretty even scale throughout. Remember, sharpen your knife often. So, it's crowing pretty nicely. That's pretty much exactly what I'm looking for in a crow. There's a solid C crow, single octave, and then when I increase my airspeed, the lower octave comes in. Really great. That lower octave tells me that there's going to be a nice resonance and depth, and also a little bit of flexibility to the cane, but there's not so much rattle that it becomes too flexible and therefore unstable. So now I'm going to try the reed on the oboe again, now that I've scraped it down a little bit, made it a little bit closer to the finished product. Again, this is not a finished reed, but it is a day one reed. We're basically getting it to a point where you can practice on it. Testing the function of it at all ranges. I'm trying to not manipulate the reed too much with my embouchure to make it behave the way I want it to behave. I'm trying to let the reed be what it is. So generally, this reed's responding pretty well in all registers. It'll probably close down, kind of settle in a little bit as I practice on it. I'm going to leave the reed at this stage, especially considering that it's very humid, it's very hot today, and so the cane could potentially get a little bit over-soaked if I scrape it too much. So I'm going to leave it where it is, play it a little bit more tomorrow, and then refine the reed. So that pretty much wraps up this review. Really like what I've seen here. There's a really nice, shiny, nice medium hard quality to the cane. Looks like the gouger blade was nice and sharp. The inside of the cane was nice and smooth. The cane responded very, very nicely and very quickly when I scraped it. Pretty much throughout, it's maintained a pretty solid intonation. Again, if the intonation is pretty even from the outset. It means that I'm not going to have to do a lot of manipulating later in the finishing process. So again, that's also a big thumbs up there. And then, because the response is good, because the intonation is pretty good, the sound quality is also pretty solid. There's a nice bottom to the sound, which is really, really nice. I don't have to try to manipulate my scraping to build that in later on the process. It's pretty much inherent in the cane, which is really, really good. So I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you give Barton Cane products a try, because so far I have been very much impressed. Thanks so much, and let me know if you have any questions or any other topics you would like me to cover. Thanks for stopping by.